What's up, guys? It's Analyst, and we're back again for week, what is it now, 14 of the NFL
think
season?
so.
I feel like this is the
Yeah.
last week of the fantasy football regular season. The playoffs begin next week, so I hope you guys have found your way into the playoffs. I know in my leagues right now, I have one team that's 5-8 out of the 11 leagues that I'm in, and then all my other teams are 7-6 or better. So
Not
having a
bad.
pretty good year. I'll probably make the playoffs in most of them. I'm hoping at least. A lot of deciding matchups this week. But what are you looking like in your leagues right now?
Yeah, I think I'm in 8 leagues. I should be playoff bound in 5 of them, and some of them are coming down to the wire, but my chances are high. I do have one where I'm pretty much in a win and you're in, lose and you go home game, so that should be exciting. Did not get off to a good start last night, I'll tell you that.
Who do you have starting last night?
Unfortunately, Foster Moreau.
Ooh.
That's the 1 week part of the team, though. Hoping for better results from everyone else.
You could have started your boy Daniel Bellinger instead.
And he's on my bench.
Ooh. That's rough. But what's not rough is if you guys go on Underdog and you use my code ANALYST and you'll match your first deposit up to $100. So, guys, make sure to take advantage of that. We talk about it every week. I had some pretty good picks last night's game. What a wild game that was. I mean, for Baker, and look, as someone who's kind of been on the fence about like Baker's ability and talents over his entire career, I guess, it's nice to see him, kind of put that drive together. I think having a play caller like Sean McVay is a huge help, even if he has none of the weapons that the offense has to offer. Like no Allen Robinson, no Cooper Kupp, obviously, definitely doesn't help. And having a running back position that's endlessly rotating also does not help. But speaking of the running backs, it looks like Cam Akers has kind of reestablished himself as the clear RB1 in Los Angeles. We thought it was going to be Kyron Williams, at least last week after he played 70% of the snaps in week 12 and going to week 13. I was thinking about starting him in a couple leagues, and I did in one. Thankfully, I still ended up winning, but he ended up getting shot back down to like 20-30% of the snaps. Cam Akers took over the backfield, and that continued last night. We saw Kyron a little more on like third downs and passing downs, but ultimately he couldn't even get 4 points. So any thoughts on this game other than Baker's goated for what he was able to do?
Yeah, I mean, back when the report came out that Cam Akers was away from the team for whatever personal reasons, healthy and active, week in and week out, I began to trade for him in some leagues, hoping like I could just put someone who I was going to drop anyway onto some other rosters for Cam Akers. I did that in a league that you're in and picked him up off of waivers in the other. Started him in both of those this week, and I feel all right about it. Yeah, I think it's worth noting that he had a pretty costly fumble that led to Raiders points, I believe, while the Rams were losing, and they kept him in the game. And I think that says all you need to know about this situation. The Rams do have some pretty good run game matchups in the fantasy playoffs. They play the Packers in week 15 and the Chargers in week 17. Those are two really good matchups, hypothetically speaking, for a running back. So if this offense looks all right under Baker Mayfield, that could be a very interesting story for the fantasy playoffs. And from the Raiders side, you have Derek Carr with a really terrible game. As a Devontae Adams owner, I couldn't afford that. And I know a lot of other people are not going to be happy with it as well. Josh Jacobs gets hurt, leaves the game, and still almost comes out with 100 yards and a touchdown. So,
yeah, and I think what's crazy about last night too is like it seems like the Raiders got too comfortable. Like they got the lead, they just kept trying to run it. There was no creativity in the offense. Derek Carr, obviously, as you mentioned, throwing terrible picks. I just feel like they kind of expected a cakewalk through the rest of the game because Devontae Adams gets like 3 catches for 70 yards, and clearly he's making plays. And then Derek Carr kind of gets desperate at the end and tries to force him the ball and throws 2 bad picks. So it's a bit of a disaster in Las Vegas for a team that might have been contending for that last playoff spot in the AFC. I mean, looking at their matchups going forward, a lot of people felt like they were kind of a dark horse to come in and take that last playoff spot, but losing to the Rams just kind of puts all that to bed. So quite unfortunate, but at the same time, like Adams was on a huge streak of like 3 or 4 games in a row, just getting absolutely absurd amount of points, and then tonight he craps to bed. It's not even because of Jalen Ramsey, right? It's Jalen Ramsey who's getting toasted all year. So kind of a wild game, but at the end of the day, like you mentioned, Cam Akers, if you have him right now, if he's available in any of your leagues, he's got some good matchups against Green Bay and Los Angeles Chargers, so he could be viable going forward. Do we trust any of these Rams pass catchers? I mean, Van Jefferson, Tutu Atwell. I'm not really, pick or poison with those guys. Ben Skoranek, he had like 9 targets last night and made some pretty good catches. So I guess if you have to pick one, him or Van Jefferson. But for the most part, I think Cam Akers is the only guy who I'm kind of looking at this offense right now.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, so let's jump into some of the matchups here. We got the Buffalo Bills hosting the New York Jets. So this should be a big one. Mike White and the Jets kind of trying to make a little bit of a run here. They just lost to Minnesota last week. It was a really close game. Mike White definitely kept it close, and they had a good drive at the end of the game. Just unfortunately couldn't get it done. Yeah. So it's all right. But for the Jets side, from the sound of it, Zonovan Knight is going to keep his role, and that's what the coaches were saying for the Jets, that even with Michael Carter potentially coming back, Zonovan Knight is going to keep his role. So if you have him on your team, congratulations. You might have a mid to low end RB2 for the rest of the year. On top of that, Garrett Wilson still piling together huge game after huge game. We know the weak point for this Buffalo defense, at least early on, has been the secondary with, a lot of those guys banged up. I believe Tre'Davious White is back now, but I'm not backing down from the matchup for Garrett Wilson. He's still going to be a guy I'm plugging into my lineups. Mike White, at the same time, I know a lot of people have been using him as a streamer. I'm not overly excited to do that this week going into Buffalo, so I'll probably stray away from that. And on the flip side, look, the big story is James Cook. And a lot of people put in a lot of claims for James Cook this week. I, put in a big one for him in one of our leagues. I was able to snag him, not really knowing what to expect, right? Because he still played less snaps than Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary played 44% of the snaps. James Cook obviously had 20 touches. But what can we expect from James Cook going forward? Is he someone who we feel like you can just kind of plug and play and forget? Do we need to see more? Like, this is not an easy matchup either against the Jets.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, he looked good when he had the ball. And not only was he getting carries, he was getting targets as well, which Devin Singletary has at times and hasn't at times. So, I mean, I liked James Cook coming out of the draft. I think that they'd probably be better off using him more than Devin Singletary. It's just a question of will it continue?
Yeah, and we even mentioned before, I think last week, saying that he was trending in the direction of getting higher and higher usage, especially as a pass catcher. And that was a specialty coming out of college, coming out of Georgia. He was considered one of the best, if not the best, pass catching running back in this class. So him and Kyron Williams were back to back, but I think at this point he's kind of outnotched Kyron Williams in that atmosphere. As for the rest of the team, I mean, we know Stephon Diggs is going to do his thing, whether it's against Sauce Gardner or not. Gabriel Davis has kind of fallen off a little bit. He caught a touchdown last week, but other than that, he's been very inconsistent. Isaiah McKenzie seeing a bit of a bigger role down the stretch here. So, look, with these receivers, it's kind of just like Diggs obviously starting, but Davis and McKenzie are both guys who are flex worthy just because of their upside in this offense with Josh Allen. So I wouldn't back down from starting either of those guys. This isn't, especially with Sauce Gardner on Diggs, not that it's going to make much of a difference for Diggs himself, but it might make a difference for Josh Allen in terms of like who he's looking to throw the ball to. So I would look for Diggs and McKenzie to be starting my flex positions this week.
Yeah, pretty much hit on everything there. I'm a little bit suspect of Michael Carter returning and potentially taking some carries away. I don't really like to trust. I really don't like to take the coach's word for it a lot of the time, but it does seem promising. I mean, Zonovan Knight looked good while he was out there, so I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I guess the official word here, because it's going to be asked a lot this week, do we start James Cook? And obviously it's always going to depend on who your options are, because if your options are like James Cook or Saquon Barkley, clearly you're not. Well, we don't know if Saquon's starting this week. It's another question there. But essentially, if you have a startable player, you're not just benching them for James Cook just because you now have James Cook. Like it's going to depend on the matchup. I would say he was a desperate start. I would say if you're desperate, he has the upside to get. I mean, he had 20 touches last week, so if that continues, he could hit. But he could also be a complete miss. So I would call him a desperate start. You'd also have to be pretty desperate to start Deshaun Watson after last week's performance against the Houston Texans. I mean, what a crapshoot. I mean, you can't blame the guy so much. Well, I mean, blame him for other things, but you can't blame him because he hasn't played a game in like 2 years. He played one playoff, I think it was a preseason game. He looked awful in that. He didn't really look all that great in this last week either. So what can we expect from Deshaun Watson and this offense moving forward? Are there guys you're buying into with Watson, not buying into with Watson?
I think it's worth noting that Amari Cooper was the alpha last week. He had 9 targets, and I think the most anybody else had was 3, which is a really big deal in theory. But that's if Watson can start completing the passes to them, right? I mean,
that would be nice.
It was really, really rough last week. And I mean, it's his first game in 2 years and all. And you could, I just don't think he looked rusty, right? Like his pocket presence was good. That's usually the part of the game that you're rusty with. It's your like making reads in real time that might be a little bit slow. And he was doing that well. He was just throwing the ball into no man's land. The ball hit the ground way too many times for my liking. I'm definitely concerned. I'm not overly concerned necessarily. I really don't think Cooper is going to be any less fantasy relevant than he was with Jacoby Brissett in there. There's a slight chance, I suppose, that Watson looks like this for the rest of the year. But if he's targeting Cooper 10 times a game, I'm still playing him. So I think I am officially bought into Amari Cooper, and the rest of the teams sort of will wait and see, besides Nick Chubb, of course.
Yeah, we know what Chubb is at this point. And look, it's not a great matchup for Nick Chubb against the Bengals. We assume that they're going to be down points off, a red hot Bengals team that just came off beating the Kansas City Chiefs. Joe Mixon expected to be back for them. Jamar Chase at full swing. So, you're starting your guys from that side. But, for the Brown side, David Njoku, he's back at practice. I have him starting in a couple leagues. I'm just kind of hoping that he gets a little bit of a leg up with Watson. He was actually doing pretty decent with Jacoby Brissett. And he's a big play waiting to happen. I mean, the last time we saw him in a game, I think he got hurt on the game-winning touchdown with Jacoby. So, and that was against Tampa Bay, I believe. A lot of I believes here, but maybe I should double check before
You're right.
I talk about it. See, I knew it. That's because I knew it. I was right. But yeah, I mean, that's what we're looking at for this Browns offense. It could stay the same level of crap that it is, but there's a chance that Watson kind of remembers how to play quarterback at some point, and then this turns into a different team and a different offense, because Watson at his best, we know, is a top fantasy quarterback. So that could go with the rest of the team. Man, what an ugly matchup for the Houston Texans. I mean, if you're not starting the Dallas Cowboys defense in like DFS in like any way possible, like I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the Browns defense last week had like 30 points facing the Houston Texans, and we know what the Dallas Cowboys defense is capable of with guys like Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, and stuff like that. So, do you trust anyone on the Texans? I mean, Brandon Cooks expected to miss this game. Dameon Pierce getting about 60-70% of the snaps still. Like, are we starting Pierce? Are we starting Nico Collins with Davis Mills making a comeback? Like,
I think the only thing I'd consider is playing Dameon Pierce if I'm desperate. I traded Dameon Pierce away in the one league I drafted him in, and it was at the right time too. It was right before this whole downward spiral started. I mean, the Texans offense has always been bad, but this is just a new level. I mean, Davis Mills is back. It doesn't matter. They were bad before he got benched. The spread on this game is 17 points, which I think is pretty hilarious. I don't think I've seen one that big this season, for sure. And I mean, the last time this happened, me and Mustafa were making fun of the Panthers for being 16-point underdogs against the Buccaneers, and they beat them. I don't think that's going to happen here. The Cowboys are rolling right now, and the Texans are doing quite the opposite. I really would prefer to not touch anybody on the Texans.
Yeah, but if you're super desperate, I can see Nico Collins potentially being a play. I think Davis Mills. We talk about a new level of bad for the Houston Texans offense, and this obviously isn't saying much. But for what it's worth, I think Kyle Allen is worse than Davis Mills. Take that for what you will. But yeah, I mean, I'm starting Nico Collins if you're desperate, right? So we had two desperate starts so far: James Cook, Nico Collins. If you're really in a tight spot, which a lot of people are, there's 6 teams in a bye this week. Make it or break it playoff time. So if you're desperate, I don't hate Nico. I think he got a touchdown last week, their sole touchdown. So anything's possible. For the Cowboys side, you already know who you're starting. I'm just honestly scared that this is going to turn into a 40-3 score in the third quarter. And then Dak's going to hit the bench, and then Cooper Rush is going to get some work. And then Malik Davis is going to come in and get 100 yards by the time the game's over. Like, this could be that type of game. And they've had that type of game like a couple times, it feels like, over the last few weeks. So I'm starting Pollard. I'm starting Zeke. I guess another desperate start. Do we go crazy here and say that Malik Davis could be a desperate start? Are they going to whack the Texans that badly that Malik Davis comes into the game in the fourth quarter and all they do is run the ball and he ends up getting 60, 70 yards and a touchdown? Like, it's such a possible outcome. And if you're that desperate, I think it's worth looking into. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that's a bit of a stretch, or do you think that's actually kind of realistic?
I mean, it's certainly a stretch, but I'm in a 32-person league just for fun with a few of my friends, and I am starting Malik Davis. So,
wow, didn't expect that to happen.
Yeah.
Were you doing 32 team on a sleeper?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because I know he's
struggling badly. Too many injuries. I have Leonard Fournette, Mike Williams, and Lamar Jackson.
Do you guys do like kick return points or anything in that league?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's to add extra value to some of these players, like you kind of got to do that. And instead of defenses, I did a 32 team league last year, and instead of defenses, we did one IDP player, and then instead of quarterback, we did a super flex and no quarterback position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I started out we only have offensive players. But I started out 4-1, lost Mike Williams to injury. Leonard Fournette started getting hurt. Now Lamar's hurt. I'm down to 5-8. Oh, yeah. Well.
That league was very interesting because you had some people like going straight for quarterbacks. You had some people saying screw it. And then you had some people with their second pick taking their handcuff because it's like, if their starter gets hurt, you definitely need that coverage. And I think there was one guy who like drafted Cordero Patterson, of course, in that year where he had his big year, and he ended up winning just because
that's awesome.
One guy paid off, right? So
yeah,
that's just kind of how it works. Next game here, we got Detroit Lions versus Minnesota Vikings. DeAndre Swift is back, or so it seems. He played over 50% of the offensive snaps. He scored over 20 points last week. As a Swift owner in a couple leagues, I am ecstatic about this because he is my first-round pick. He did start the week as a limited participant in practice with an ankle injury, but he was recently upgraded to full at practice. The Lions are moving right now. I think this is going to be the upset of the week. I would not be surprised to see the Lions actually fend off the Vikings. And if they do, I think they can take it as far as getting that last playoff seed. So in turn, I mean, what this really means is like the Lions are still fighting. So they're not at the point where they want to shut down Swift. He's clearly their best running back, and he makes the most plays out of any of these running backs. So they want him on the field to help out their offense. So they're not going to shy away from using him is what I'm trying to say. So him and Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm loading up both these guys. Jamal Williams, I think he still obviously has that touchdown upside, but he does take a bit of a hit with DeAndre Swift kind of getting back into the swing of things. So and every week we are like, you kind of know what the Vikings are, and that's still true. So anything else you want to add to these two teams?
I think the Vegas line is worth noting here. The Lions are favored to win this game, which is rather interesting. Favored? Yeah, I mean, they're home. That usually gives a few points of a swing, but they're -2 in this game.
What?
Which I think is very telling of how certain people think this matchup is going to go. And I would agree with you. DeAndre Swift is on the rise. Me and Mustafa get frustrated every Sunday. Someone always comes into the live and asks if they should start Jamal Williams. And we keep saying, his usage is going down. And he always scores a touchdown and makes us look stupid. So, but you're right. His usage went down to probably a season low. I mean, I don't have every single week of snaps in front of me at the moment, but 30% is rather low. My only other question is, will Jameson Williams get involved? He was activated last week, got a single target. I don't think he touched the ball. He's a dynamic player when he's getting used, but you have to wonder if they're just sort of taking it slow and waiting for him to be fully healthy.
Yeah, I think at this point they're not relying on him by any means. I think it's just kind of like when he's ready. He's fresh off an ACL. Obviously, he played no preseason. This is his first NFL action ever, right? So obviously he's been exposed to like practices and things like that, but game time is different. So he played like 10% of the snaps last week. He got one target. I imagine that ramps up a little bit, but to the point of using him in my fantasy lineups, we are weeks and weeks away at this point. There's surprises, right? I mean, as you mentioned, he's a big play waiting to happen. So it just takes that one route for him to actually score, and then maybe they start using him a little more. But I believe we're weeks away from even thinking about making him a weekly starter. On top of that, though, I do think Jared Goff is a pretty popular streamer this week. I'm streaming him in a league where I have Justin Fields. Typically, the guy I'm playing against is streaming Jared Goff as well. Minnesota's secondary has been decimated by injuries and just by like touchdowns, right? Because they just can't defend any of that shit. So yeah, I mean, I think Jared Goff, good streamer. DeAndre Swift, you're starting him. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 100% you're starting him. I'm kind of scared. I'm going against Amon-Ra in a couple leagues this week, which is not good. I'm pretty scared. So we'll see how that works out. But let's look forward at this game here. Your team, the New York Giants, hosting the Philadelphia Eagles. Talk about a team going downhill, rolling the wrong way. Let's talk about the New York Giants. I mean, they got a tough matchup here. They got tough matchups ahead. And I think at the end of the year, even with, the way they're going to end the season not being where you wanted it to, the fact that they were on top of the world at one point during the season is something that you can kind of look back on and say, like, wow, this is a huge step forward. I don't think anyone expected an offense where they have to rely on Richie James and Darius Slayton to actually make the playoffs and make some sort of run. So it puts you in a better position draft-wise. You can get one of these top talents at wide receiver, potentially use some of that money to get a wide receiver not named Kenny Golladay onto that team. So there's an opportunity for the Giants to be good in the next couple of years, but they got a tough season ahead of them here. So what are your thoughts here on this game? Is there any one of the Giants you're considering starting? Saquon Barkley, I think he's dealing with a neck issue. Report today was that they're hoping he can play, but if he doesn't, it might be Matt Breida season, which I don't know.
This is just such a horrible matchup for the Giants. The Eagles from top down are just an elite roster all around. Their secondary is great, going against probably maybe behind the Rams, the worst receiver room in the league. We'll see. One of them is certainly the worst right now with all the injuries on both sides. Ravens as well. It's just not a great feeling. The Eagles offensive line and defensive line, both great. The Giants run defense, not great. Run offense, not doing particularly well right now. Getting some players back, I don't think that really matters. The Eagles D-line is really, really good. Even if Saquon's healthy, I mean, you're playing him, but I feel like his upside is capped with such a tough matchup. The only real thing I see going anyway for the Giants in this game is potentially using Daniel Jones as a running threat. That's like what they like to do when their entire offense gets neutralized, which, believe it or not, is pretty often. They started to do that in overtime last week against Washington, and they tied. But that's what they like to do when nothing else is working. It is get Daniel Jones on the move and hope it opens some players up that way. I
hope he doesn't.
I don't expect much from the Giants this week. It is what it is. From the Eagles side, it's a great matchup for everyone. Particularly Sanders, Hurts, and Javonte Smith, in my opinion. The Giants, they're just so banged up, and they were never a good roster to begin with. And they're all hurt. So yeah, things are looking down for the Giants. The Eagles are on a bit of a roll again. I'm looking to start pretty much any Eagle that I have.
Yeah, yeah, I feel that. And I think what's important here too is we talked about Daniel Bellinger earlier as well. I mean, tight end is a shit show right now. So anyone you can get your hands on who's getting consistent targets, I think Daniel Bellinger kind of fits that mold. Like if you're looking at waivers, you're trying to figure out what guy you can actually trust. I would put Daniel Bellinger in there. He's got a pretty decent matchup against the Eagles. Obviously, their strength is their corners. Their safeties are a bit banged up. I know Gardner Johnson got hurt, and they're kind of on some of their backup guys right now. Linebackers, I think Kaiser White also got hurt last week. So in terms of coverage, I think Daniel Jones is going to have the optimal matchup. They're going to be forced to pass the ball, and I don't know if you're going to trust Darius Slayton against Darius Slay. So in my eyes, especially if Saquon's out too, right? They're going to rely on the short passing game. It's going to be Daniel Bellinger. So I'm not saying Daniel Bellinger is a must start by any means. But if you're desperate for a tight end, he fits that mold. And we have a lot of desperate starts, I guess, in this episode. That's kind of the theme here, I guess. But yeah, think about desperate. Let's look at the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers, both desperate to. And, this is another team that I saw someone mention as a potential dark horse for that last playoff spot. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they're kind of turning it up a little bit. Kenny Pickett, not that he's playing well. But, the defense with TJ Watt, it's kind of showing up a bit. The Ravens right now without Lamar Jackson, they're starting Tyler Huntley this week. They don't have Rashad Bateman anymore. That running back room at this point, we now have J.K. Dobbins. That defense is banged up. Like, this is a different Ravens team than the one that we saw in the beginning of the year. So for the Ravens side, I don't think there's a running back that I want to trust at this point. It seems like they're going to lean on Gus Edwards, and the next week they pull it, and then they lean on Kenyon Drake. And for the wide receivers, sometimes it's Demarcus Robinson, sometimes it's Devin Duvernay. The only guy I'm trusting is Mark Andrews. I don't even like Tyler Huntley all that much as a streamer. Typically, Tyler Huntley is actually a pretty good streamer. He plays very well. But, yeah, I'm not trusting those guys this week, at least.
Yeah, I do. I like the Steelers as that sort of dark horse 7 seed. I think Kenny Pickett's sort of falling victim to like the internet hate train. He's not good by any means, but I don't think he's been all that bad. And with TJ Watt back, the defense is playing well, and he's been doing enough to win. One thing I am done with is trying to expect a George Pickens fantasy breakout every single week.
It was my start of the week last week. I don't even want to check the comments under that post. I knew it was going to be bad. But, everything was lining up. We talked about it. Everything was lining up in that matchup against Atlanta for him to have a big game. And he gets, 2 targets?
Yep. So. That's just I'm done really expecting anything from this offense. I do like how Najee Harris has sort of been getting his he's not back to where he was last year, but he's somewhere in between, which is nice. From the Ravens side, you mentioned it. It's just a tough matchup, and I really don't want to play any of these running backs at all. With J.K. Dobbins even expected back now, it's just a mess that I don't really want to deal with, and especially against a solid Steelers defense. I'm just staying away in general.
Yeah, I definitely feel that, and speaking here on the Baltimore Ravens side, Lamar Jackson Brian Dable just said, okay, nothing new. Sorry, just getting updates. But yeah, I literally just saw a report on Lamar Jackson. It seems like he's definitely going to miss this week and potentially time after that as well. So we'll see. But moving on here, we got the Tennessee Titans versus Jacksonville Jaguars. For the Titans side, you know what Derrick Henry is. We know what Derrick Henry does against other teams, the AFC South. So if you weren't happy last week, you'll be really happy this week with what you get from Derrick Henry, at least what we feel. This Jaguars team, talk about a team trending in the negative direction, that would be them. On top of that, Treylon Burks, kind of this guy that we've started to rely on a week-to-week basis. He got a concussion off a great touchdown last week. He made a great catch, but unfortunately paid the price for it. It's so funny how after the whole Tua thing, now every player who gets concussion automatically misses like 1 or 2 weeks. It
Yeah.
used to be like they get a concussion and then, they somehow magically clear protocol by like Saturday morning and then they play the next day. But now, every time a player gets a concussion, it's almost guaranteed they miss at least one game. So I am not expecting Traylon Burks to play in this game. A lot of teams are being more cautious, at least right now. That could very well change in the future, knowing the NFL. But as of right now, I'm not expecting Traylon Burks to play in this matchup. Is there anything you're expecting from the Jaguars side of this? I mean, Christian Kirk 1 week, Zay Jones another week, Travis Etienne seems to be the only consistent guy there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, who knows? Travis Etienne, even Trevor Lawrence is questionable in this game. He said he's going to play, so I believe him. But like you said it best. Every single week, it's someone else. I think we even had a Marvin Jones week somewhere in there. I'm just sort of done trying to guess this. It is what it is. Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, if you need to start one of them, it's not the end of the world, but just know what the risk you're getting into. I mean, not really much else to say about it. It's just 1 week on, 1 week off.
It's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes for a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, who at times look like they could be a threat, and then at times look like, why are we even talking about them? Why are we even talking about Russell Wilson? Denver Broncos versus Kansas City Chiefs. What a crap offense. With all the chances they've been like given, I just don't understand what they're doing anymore. Jerry Jeudy, I think he's probably the only guy I'm like leaning towards starting in this matchup. Cortland Sutton dealing with an injury now, so him and Jeudy are taking turns being the team's wide receiver one. I think Judy's going to do a little bit of a better job. So I'll trust Jeudy in my lineups. And on the flip side, tough matchup a bit for guys, especially these wide receivers. I mean, Broncos defense, for as bad as their offense has been playing pretty well. But I will say that Isaiah Pacheco is meriting weekly start status. I mean, with the work that he's been getting, production, and we talked about it so much. I mean, this kid runs harder than any running back I've seen. I mean, he just runs mean. Like, you see him after every play, like the whistle blows and his legs are still churning. Like, he fights to the last drop every single play. So there's a lot to like about Isaiah Pacheco, and they're recently starting to give him that workload. So I would consider him as a flex play, desperate flex. I don't want to say desperate because I think he's actually a reasonable flex play this week and already have enough desperate matchups here. But anyone else from either of these two teams that you're kind of looking at here?
I did make a note that Kadarius Toney is likely to be back this week, but how it doesn't really matter because, again, that's just not the way we're expecting this game to go. It's probably going to be a Travis Kelce game, as every game is. And
except last week,
for the receivers. And from the Broncos side, I think Greg Dulcich is worth a shout out. When Cortland Sutton went down last week, he sort of took the targets for the offense. And as you said before, can we name like 5 good tight ends that we trust every week? I don't think so. I think I can name 1 tight end that I trust every week, and that's Travis Kelce. So, I mean, why not? I'm starting him in our league in a do or die win and I'm in situation type of deal. I'm starting him. Thankful that I benched Foster Moreau in that league at least. Decent matchup, and with Sutton probably not going to play. I mean, besides Jeudy, he's probably going to be their guy.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is they said last week they're starting to use Dulcich a little more as like a wide receiver kind of player. Like they're really viewing him as an every down kind of guy, which is great. So if that continues, as you mentioned, like that's kind of what the tight end landscape is at this point. I have one league, which is a dynasty league, where my tight ends are Dallas Goedert and Kyle Pitts. So obviously a big bench. So I have guys like Greg Dulcich, Hunter Henry, but I'm very thankful that my third tight end is kind of able to carry the load until Goddard gets back, which is expected to come back next week. So hopeful for that. And he'll definitely be in all my lineups because it's desperate out here. San Francisco 49ers and Brock Purdy taking on Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Look, as much as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers came back last week and ended up winning that matchup, this offense sucks. Like this, for as good as Chris Godwin has been lately, and for as good as Mike Evans can be, I don't know if it's a Brady thing, but like every time I watch Brady play in one of these games, it always makes me feel like the receivers are kind of like at fault. And
Mm-hmm.
it feels like they shouldn't be. It's kind of a weird feeling, but maybe it's just Brady's reaction. Like, oh, they should be in this spot instead. Mike Evans had some ugly drops. They're not running the right routes. But I mean, the offense hasn't changed. So I just kind of feel like that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just, I guess the way it's being perceived, in my mind at least, is that it's the receiver's fault, not Brady's. Maybe a biased Patriots fan, who knows? But at the end of the day, this offense is just not great right now. San Francisco 49ers, one of the best defenses in the league, if not the best defense right now. I'm not straying away from starting Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. I'm probably straying away from starting Tom Brady. If you have him or if you've been starting him, I'd look for another option. At the running back position, it looks like it's going to be continual mess between Leonard Fournette and Rashad White. The good part is it's a fun mess because both of them are getting like 7 or 8 targets a game. And I don't expect that to change either because Brady's going to keep airing it out.
Yeah.
What is notable, though, is Leonard Fournette. I don't think he practiced today. Friday. I don't think he practiced Thursday either. So it could just be Rashad White's season. And in that case, I'll definitely fire him up as a sure start. But what do you feel about this game? Any thoughts on the 49ers side of the things?
I'm just intrigued. I mean, we saw what they did to this Dolphins offense that has been rolling nonstop pretty much since Tua came back from his concussion problem. Yeah. And they stopped it and won with a 7th-round rookie quarterback who'd never played in the NFL. For what it's worth, I wasn't exactly a Brock Purdy hater or anything. I watched a little bit of his college film and decided he could be a pretty nice backup day one. And that seems like exactly what he's going to be asked to do in a very easy situation, but still, like, beating the Dolphins is impressive regardless. I think that the Niners are still on a roll, even though they lost Jimmy Garoppolo, and their offense may look a little different now without Jimmy. I tend to believe that Debo and McCaffrey may be the benefactors here because they just might want to get the ball in their, best players' hands, their shiftiest players, get it out of Brock Purdy's hands quickly. That's what happened last week. I would expect them both to be getting carries, targets out of the backfield, targets as receivers. I mean, you still have Kittle and Ayuk getting in there, and we'll have to wait for more clarity still. But that's, if I had to guess, I would guess that they begin to lean on those two guys a little bit more.
Yeah, Christian McCaffrey and Debo both tied for 24% target share last week, and Brandon Ayuk right behind with 22, and then the fourth highest target share on that team was 9, so 9%. So definitely heavily revolving around those three guys.
Yeah, and then you mentioned the Bucs running backs. I agree. They seem like they're both startable in the midst of this little competition that they have going on. And as for the receivers, Chris Godwin's kind of taken over the target share with Mike Evans. A few tough matchups, few tough games. I'm not fully convinced that this is like a Godwin takeover, and I do think it'll walk itself back a little bit, but I do like starting Chris Godwin every week at this point. Mike Evans, I mean, you know what he's capable of. His 1,000-yard receiving season streak is on the line now. He's only at 750 with a few games to go.
I was about to say, I wanted to check how close he was. I mean, they got 4 or 5 games left? 5 games left?
5 games left. He needs 50 a game, which at the rate he's been on the past 2 weeks isn't going to happen. But I'd expect him to get there. We'll see. But yeah, I think the main takeaway is Chris Godwin has pretty much cemented himself as the every week start he's been the past few years, which he wasn't earlier in the season.
Which, recovering from an ACL, so not completely on him. But let's look forward to this match here. We got Seattle Seahawks versus Carolina Panthers. For the Seahawks side, I mean, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf are rolling right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're putting up a ton of points. Carolina Panthers typically pretty good against wide receivers. But on the flip side, looks like Kenneth Walker is in danger of missing this game. He did not practice Wednesday. He did not practice Thursday. It's a shame because this is a great matchup for him, and I'm sure a lot of people are relying on him to get into the fantasy playoffs here. DJ Dallas, I think, is back at practice at this point, so And look, it's not like I'm like excited about any of these running backs for Seattle. If Kenneth Walker does miss this game, I just don't think I'm buying into any of them because it could very much so be Travis Homer. It could be DJ Dallas. It could be Tony Jones for all we know. Maybe they feel like bringing Alex Collins back from the dead again. But for me, it seems like it's a stinger for Kenneth Walker. He's probably going to miss this game if they're going to be conservative, and then he'll be back next week is my assumption. But yeah, for the meantime, I am not starting any of these running backs. I will continue to start Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Is there any one of the Panthers that we should look out for? I guess Deontay Foreman.
Yeah, I mean, Foreman took over the backfield the last time we saw him. I mean, I don't see why that shouldn't continue because he produced with his touches. DJ Moore has a good matchup in theory, and Sam Darnold played well when we saw him 2 weeks ago. Let's see. I am starting DJ Moore in one of our leagues. I don't really have a choice. I'm not really doing it by choice, but I don't hate it either. I think it's, again, a good matchup, and Sam Darnold played well. Sam Darnold was his quarterback last year, and DJ Moore was a pretty decent fantasy receiver as far as I remember. Disappointed, as he does every year compared to his ADP, but better than what has been going on so far this year for sure. So, yeah, I mean, DJ Moore, I would keep an eye open, not particularly excited again, but I'd watch out for him.
Yeah, and I think Foreman, like I have Foreman in a couple leagues, and I kind of had to make a choice, like, am I going to start Foreman or Pierce in one league? And I'm actually starting Foreman over him. I think Seattle's been pretty bad against running backs, especially lately. So, and not that they've slipped. I don't think they've necessarily slipped as a team, but I don't think they're as invincible as they seemed early on with Geno Smith. So, potentially a very workable game here for Deontay Foreman against Seattle Seahawks. I think he's going to be one of my starts this week. Moving on here, Los Angeles Chargers versus Miami Dolphins. Mike Williams practiced in full. He's expected to be back for this game. Tua dealing with a little bit of an injury, but he's fully expected to play in this game along with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. What are your thoughts on this game? I mean, from the sound of it, it seems like it could be a shootout. Obviously, as fantasy managers, that's what we want. That's what we hope for. But what are you expecting here?
Yeah. I mean, again, I mentioned it before. We saw the Dolphins kind of come back to earth last week. I don't expect that to be the case right now. The Chargers defense is not particularly great. They have been playing a lot of close games recently too, which I think is worth noting. This offense, we know what it's capable of if they, try and air the ball out, which sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, mostly don't. But they have the players to do so. With Mike Williams coming back, I don't really know what to make of the receiver room. I mean, even when he played, I think that was 2 weeks ago before he got hurt again, Allen and Palmer were still getting targets, very high amount of targets. And that's what we've seen while he's hurt as well. I don't know who to trust. If I had to make a bet, I'd just bet Keenan Allen is going to be the most productive one, but I really don't know. I mean, they really seem to like using Josh Palmer here. So it's definitely a question mark. I am not really against starting any of the three of them per se, but I feel better about Allen and Palmer, I think.
I feel like Mike Williams is kind of in a good spot here to kind of exploit his matchup as well against the Dolphins. So I do feel like Mike Williams is definitely worth the start this week, especially if you're in a league where you've been waiting for him to come back. Like my flex options in one league are, I think, Jacoby Myers, who at this point, I don't know. We'll talk about that in a second. Jacoby Myers, Mike Williams, and I'm trying to pull up to see who my other option was. So Mike Williams, Jacoby Myers, and Pierce, essentially. So yeah, I'm rolling with Mike Williams this week.
Yeah, I would agree. And then the Dolphins, right? I mean, who knows what's going on with these running backs? It seems like Mike McDaniel's taken that out of Kyle Shanahan's playbook. I think
right.
their running back snap shares added up to 115% last week, which I know because 90,000 people ask how they could possibly add up to over 100% every single week.
3 years of making these posts, and I still don't know. And it's in the caption, so after this point, I just let it ride.
The point is, who knows what's going on? I mean, Mostert had more snaps than Wilson last week, which I don't really think we were expecting. But Mike McDaniel is a Kyle Shanahan disciple, and that's kind of what you're going to get with these people, I guess. We see guys like Sean McVay starting to lean towards Cam Akers after a long run of unpredictability. I just don't see that happening here. He has two good options to play in Mostert and Jeff Wilson. It feels like they're going to be 50-50ing or back and forth every other week.
Yeah, talk about inconsistency here. Let's go to the New England Patriots and the Arizona Cardinals. Probably the two poster childs of inconsistency in the NFL right now. For the Patriots side, Ramondre Stevenson, he played 98% of the offensive snaps last week without Damian Harris. Damian Harris looks like he's going to miss this game, so fire him up. He's also led the team in target share over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So Ramondre Stevenson, if you have him, congratulations. He's still looking like a league winner at this point. I just hope to God, as a Patriots fan, that we do something different on an offense. Did you see the interview? I think it was with Vance Joseph.
Yeah, I did.
He's talking about the Patriots offense, and he's like, he literally said, he's like, this is what happens when you make a defensive coordinator your offensive coordinator. Like, this is a lot of screens, a lot of behind the line of scrimmage stuff. Like, this is what the offense looks like. And I've vented about it, I feel like 2 or 3 times on these videos so far about, like, if Mac Jones is not your guy, if you don't trust him to throw the ball deep, either put in Bailey Zappi or whatever. Just like, if you don't trust this guy to actually throw the ball, why is he starting? So I don't know. I could rant about the Patriots for days, but as of right now, the only Patriot I want to start is Ramondre Stevenson. On the flip side, Arizona Cardinals, we get to see Kyler with DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown on the field for a whole game. Dare I say Rondale Moore is also healthy? Am I hearing this?
I believe you're right.
I believe. I'm just confirming.
He is questionable, but we'll see.
Didn't practice Thursday. All right. Well, even if Rondale Moore doesn't play, Marquise Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, we get to see an offense with both of these guys on the field. I'm excited. I'm probably starting both of them, to be honest. I mean, it seems like last week DeAndre Hopkins was a little more of a big play, and Marquise Brown was kind of getting a little more targets. So that's just one game of sample size with both these guys in the field. But I'm starting both of them. I know the matchup isn't great. Patriots defense typically plays pretty well, but they're going to be forced to throw the ball in this matchup. I don't think James Conner is going to have much success on the ground. Not to say I'm not starting him, because he's getting a monster workload, especially as a pass catcher as well. So any other thoughts on this game?
You hit the nail on the head. I wrote Hopkins, Brown, and Conner all startable for the Cardinals. Brown had a quarter of the targets 2 weeks ago, last game they played, and Hopkins was right behind him with 20%. So they made up about 50% of the target share on their own. And that speaks volume about what they're trying to do here. It's Hopkins, Brown, and Conner is going to be the identity going forward. And from the Patriots side, I think you're exactly right. Again, I mean, Ramondre, Myers is the receiver you want if you need, but I just prefer to stay away. It feels like it's not even necessarily that Mac Jones isn't their guy. It just feels like Matt Patricia isn't their guy, which I think just about everybody could have predicted happening going into the season. But we know Bill Belichick is loyal. But even him, I believe it was him. He said, it's just too difficult to fire one of your play callers in the middle of the season.
Yeah.
Can you imagine like having the job of being the play caller and someone says that about you, and now you're just like coaching the last 5 games? Like, oh man.
I mean, I think at that point, what you do is like, let's talk about like if you have like a run game coordinator, or maybe running backs coach, quarterback coach, something like that. One of those guys who you feel like might be a little more dialed in than the others, like, talk to Julian Edelman, maybe pull a Colts, pull a Jim Irsay, and have conversations with guys like Julian Edelman, or like one of those guys like Brian Hoyer. I mean, have Brian Hoyer call the plays. I think you'll do a lot better if Brian Hoyer actually calls the plays.
Probably.
You know what's funny is a lot of people say like, oh, how the hell is Brian Hoyer going to call plays? He's not a good quarterback. look at Kellen Moore, one.
Yeah.
Sean McVay is the next quarterback. I mean, just because you don't
Happens
have
all
the
the
arm
time.
talent doesn't mean you don't have the brain, and that happens a lot. So
Mhm.
that would be my vote if I'm a Patriots fan. If I'm
Yeah.
Bill Belichick, if you don't know what to do, have Matt Patricia and I guess who the fuck else is it? Is it
Yeah, I
former
think
Giants
the
head
problem
coach?
is that their number 2 is Joe Judge. So if they were to take it away from Matt Patricia, it would be him, which isn't better.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, have Brian Hoyer call the freaking plays. What can hurt? What can hurt at this point? Especially if they lose this game against Arizona, fighting for a playoff spot right now. Have Brian Hoyer call if he plays. What's the worst that can happen at this point? So,
Agreed.
and then when Matthew Slater retires, have him be the special teams coordinator. I'm just imagining like a perfect veil of ex-Patriots players coming in and taking over the offense and defense and special teams and things like that. Matt Patricia is fine on defensive coordinator. I mean, him and Bill together are perfect for defense, but offense, not so much. I saw someone say it is like, I was like, come on, Matt Patricia, it's not rocket scientists. It's not rocket science. And then you find out he's actually a rocket scientist, which is fun, but that's its own deal. But that's going to do it for this week. Obviously, a lot of teams on bye, hoping for you guys the best to get into the playoffs. Reminder here, use code ANALYST on Underdog, and they're going to match your first deposit up to $100. Best of luck, and we'll see you next week for week 1 of the playoffs.
Yeah, thanks for watching.